I bought a $4 million beachfront sanctuary to heal after secretly selling my tech startup. On my very first day there, my father called. "We are moving in tomorrow," he announced, leaving absolutely no room for argument. "It will not be a problem." I froze, the phone pressed tightly to my ear. He actually added that if I did not like it, I could find somewhere else to live. My hands shook, but a cold smile crept across my face. I had already prepared a welcome they would never forget. My name is Kelsey, 27 years old, and somehow still recovering from the deep emotional scars my family inflicted on me. As a successful artificial intelligence developer, I managed to escape their toxic environment, but I maintained occasional contact out of a misplaced sense of duty. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to family members who underestimated your worth and treated you like a burden. Growing up, my role in the family was clearly defined. I was the invisible disappointment, the scapegoat who was expected to fade into the background, while my older sister Courtney basked in the spotlight. My parents, Thomas and Brenda, were obsessed with country club status and appearances. They poured every ounce of their affection and financial resources into Courtney, molding her into their perfect golden child. I was left to figure out life entirely on my own. When I chose to study computer science instead of pursuing something they deemed socially acceptable, they practically wrote me off. They mocked my ambitions, telling everyone I was just a data clerk wasting my life staring at screens. They had absolutely no idea that my little coding hobby had evolved into a massive supply chain logistics platform that a major conglomerate had recently acquired for $45 million. I bought the beachfront property in Destin, Florida, as a gift to myself. It was a stunning modern marvel with floor-to-ceiling windows, private ocean access, and enough space to finally breathe. I wanted a quiet place to figure out my next chapter in life, but my hard-earned peace lasted exactly 24 hours. The sudden, aggressive screech of tires tearing into my pristine driveway shattered the coastal silence. I stepped out onto the front porch and watched as two rented luxury SUVs slammed into park. The doors flew open, and out stepped my entire nightmare. My father Thomas emerged first, barking harsh orders while adjusting his tailored golf shirt. My mother Brenda followed closely behind him, her eyes scanning the property with immediate calculating judgment. Then came Courtney, clutching her phone like a lifeline, recording her arrival for her dwindling social media followers. Her husband Andre stepped out of the second vehicle. Andre was a flashy luxury real estate broker, an African-American man who matched my family arrogance perfectly. He wore a designer suit that looked a size too tight and immediately began pointing at my landscaping, acting as if he already owned the place. Before I could even offer a standard greeting, Brenda marched up the stone steps and shoved right past me into the foyer. She did not hug me. She did not ask how I was doing. She just dropped her oversized handbag onto my custom entryway table and glared at me with absolute disdain. "Clear out the master suite," she commanded, her voice echoing off the high ceilings. "Thomas and I are taking it. Courtney and Andre need the ocean view room on the second floor. You can take the basement." I stood in the doorway, staring at the sheer audacity of her demand. "Mom, you cannot just barge in here and claim the bedrooms," I started to say, moving to block the bottom of the grand staircase. Courtney sneered, marching up the steps right behind our mother. She did not even break her stride as she hurled her heavy leather duffel bag directly at my chest. I stumbled backward, barely catching the heavy bag before it knocked the wind out of me. "Do not be selfish like you were when you hid your waitress tips in college, while Mom and Dad were paying my sorority dues." Courtney snapped, her voice dripping with absolute venom. "Dad lost his house to the bank. We have absolutely nowhere else to go right now. Your little summer rental is the least you can offer your own flesh and blood. Stop being such an ungrateful brat." The pieces clicked into place immediately. Thomas had bankrupted his retirement, blindly investing in Andre and his shady real estate schemes. My father had lost the family home, yet they still strutted around with this fierce, unearned entitlement. They genuinely believed I was just renting this magnificent property, probably stretching my meager data clerk salary to play pretend for a weekend. I could have kicked them out right then. I could have pulled out my deed and watched their smug faces crumble into utter humiliation. But as I looked at Andre, who was already assessing the square footage of my living room with dollar signs in his eyes, I realized a simple eviction would be far too easy. They needed a harsh lesson they would never forget. "I will move my things downstairs," I said calmly, stepping aside. I dragged my own belongings into the finished basement, leaving the upper floors to the arrogant invaders. Later that night, the house grew exceptionally quiet, save for the rhythmic crashing of the waves outside. I was sitting on my basement sofa in the pitch dark, working on my encrypted laptop, when I heard voices drifting down from the balcony directly above me. It was Andre and my father having a secretive conversation. "I checked the local zip code today," Andre whispered loudly, his voice carrying clearly on the cool ocean breeze. "This neighborhood allows commercial subleasing, Thomas. It is a total goldmine for us. We just need to trick Kelsey into signing an authorization form, maybe frame it as a standard landlord liability waiver. Once I have her signature on a power of attorney, I will list this place as a high-end vacation rental. We will charge premium rates, use the cash to bail out my firm, and get your money back." She is too clueless to ever realize what hit her. "It is foolproof," my father replied, a sinister chuckle escaping his lips. "She always was the slow one. We will handle the paperwork tomorrow morning." Sitting in the deep shadows of the basement, I gently closed my laptop. My hands were perfectly steady now. I smiled in the dark, my fingertips gently tapping the thick, legally binding property deed resting on my wooden desk. They wanted to play a high-stakes game of real estate law with the woman who owned the entire board from the beginning. The next morning, I woke up to the muffled thumping of heavy footsteps on the hardwood floors directly above my head. I climbed the basement stairs and pushed open the door to the main living area. The sight that greeted me was nothing short of a circus. Courtney had completely rearranged my custom Italian furniture, pushing my expensive leather sofas against the wall to create a makeshift studio in the center of the room. A hired photographer was hovering around her, snapping rapid-fire shots, while a massive blinding ring light dominated the space, making it impossible for anyone to walk through the kitchen. Courtney was twirling in a designer beach cover-up, holding her phone out for an Instagram live stream. "Welcome to our new summer sanctuary," she cooed to her audience, tossing her perfectly styled hair over her shoulder. "My amazing husband Andre just leased this incredible beachfront villa for us. It is the perfect place to unwind and focus on my brand. We are going to have the most exclusive summer ever." I stood by the kitchen island watching my sister openly lie to thousands of strangers about my house. She did not even pay for her own cell phone bill, let alone a $4 million property in Destin. I walked over to the hallway closet, pulled out my heavy-duty vacuum cleaner, and dragged it right into the middle of her perfectly framed shot. I reached down and yanked the plug of her ring light out of the wall socket, plugging my vacuum in its place. I hit the power button. The machine roared to life, drowning out her live stream with a deafening hum. Courtney dropped her phone with a shrill shriek. "What are you doing?" she screamed over the noise, her face contorting with rage. "You ruined my engagement rate." I turned off the vacuum and looked at her calmly. "I am cleaning my living room. Your light was in my way." Before Courtney could throw another tantrum, my mother Brenda stormed into the room. She marched straight up to me and snatched the vacuum cord right out of the wall, her eyes blazing with fury. "You are 27 years old and completely unemployed, Kelsey." Brenda shouted, her face turning a blotchy red. "Stop ruining your sister's brand. You are supposed to be helping her build her following, not sabotaging her. You always were a jealous brat, just like when you ruined her engagement dinner by talking about your stupid coding certification. Nobody cared about your little computer classes then, and nobody cares about your bad attitude now. Make yourself useful and go fetch the photographer some water." I stared at my mother. That stupid coding certification she was mocking had been the foundation of my artificial intelligence platform. The same platform that had just made me wealthier than everyone in her beloved country club combined. But I swallowed the truth, keeping my expression perfectly blank. I picked up the vacuum cord and walked back to the basement, leaving them to their pathetic charade. I knew arguing would only delay the trap I was carefully setting. My patience was tested again just a few hours later. I was sitting at my basement desk monitoring the final transfer of my corporate buyout funds when I heard unfamiliar male voices echoing from the back patio. I crept up the stairs and peered through the glass doors. Andre was standing by the infinity pool with two men wearing cheap suits and excessive cologne. They were actively measuring the deck space with a laser tool and taking photos of my private beach access. "The yield on this property as a short-term rental is insane," one of the men was saying to Andre, pointing at my pristine shoreline. We can fit 3 premium cabanas out here. If you can guarantee the sublease, my partners and I are ready to wire the advance by Friday. Andre chuckled confidently, leaning against my patio furniture. Consider it done. The current tenant is family. She is practically broke and completely dependent on us. I hold all the cards here. I pushed the glass door open and stepped out onto the patio. The sudden sound of the sliding track made the 2 shady investors jump. Who are these people, Andre? I asked, crossing my arms and staring him down. Andre barely blinked. He quickly ushered the 2 men toward the side gate, promising to call them later. Once they were out of earshot, he turned back to me with a venomous glare, his friendly demeanor vanishing instantly. Do not ever interrupt my business meetings again, he snapped, adjusting his tie with aggressive, jerky movements. This is my house, I replied, my voice dangerously even. You do not have the right to bring strangers onto this property, let alone pitch it as a commercial rental. Andre laughed, a harsh, grating sound that echoed off the ocean water. He reached into his suit jacket pocket and pulled out a neatly folded stack of printed documents. Actually, Kelsey, I have every right. He shoved the papers against my chest, forcing me to take them. Since you are jobless and living off some imaginary savings, Dad filed a financial hardship claim with his bank this morning. If you do not sign this power of attorney to let me manage the lease on this property, Dad will have your credit destroyed. He is prepared to aggressively co-sign a massive high-interest personal loan in your name using your social security number. We still have all your personal information from when you lived at home. I looked down at the document in my hands. It was a broad power of attorney granting Andre full legal control over my residency, my lease agreements, and my financial decisions regarding the property. It was a blatant, illegal power grab. You sign this right now, Andre demanded, pulling a silver pen from his pocket and thrusting it toward my face. Or we ruin your financial future before it even begins. You will never be able to rent a cardboard box, let alone a house like this, ever again. Do not test us, Kelsey. I looked at Andre's smug, punchable face. He genuinely thought he had cornered me. He thought he was dealing with a frightened, helpless younger sister who had no idea how the real world worked. He had no clue that the document he was forcing me to sign was going to be the exact piece of evidence I needed to put him behind bars. I looked down at the paper, gave him a terrified, defeated expression, and slowly reached for the pen. I pulled the silver pen from Andre's hand, letting my fingers tremble to sell the performance. He watched with greedy anticipation while my father stood behind him, nodding in stern approval. They truly believed they had me trapped. I uncapped the pen and pressed the tip against the thick paper. I did not sign my current legal signature. When I sold my tech company, my lawyers had me restructure my identity and assets. I had legally changed my signature to a highly complex, secure format, registered across all my corporate documents. The signature I scrawled onto Andre's fraudulent paperwork was the bubbly, loopy cursive I used in high school. It was legally void, entirely disconnected from the entity that actually owned this property. There, I whispered, keeping my eyes downcast as I handed the clipboard back. Are you happy now? Andre snatched the clipboard, his eyes scanning the ink before a massive grin split his face. See, Thomas? He gloated. I told you she would eventually listen to reason. My father chuckled, retrieving a bottle of vintage champagne from his golf bag. He popped the cork, pouring generous glasses for himself and his son-in-law. They did not offer me one. Instead, my father looked me up and down, taking a sip before letting out a disappointed sigh. Look at yourself, Kelsey, he muttered. If you had listened to me 5 years ago and taken that $15 an hour filing job at my buddy's firm, you would not be in this pathetic situation. You would not be wearing those cheap rags while your sister wears Chanel. You could have been a truly respectable member of society instead of a squatter in a house you cannot afford. I looked down at my clothes, biting the inside of my cheek to keep from laughing out loud. I was wearing a beige cashmere sweater and tailored linen trousers. They were completely devoid of logos, which to my parents meant they came from a discount bin. My father had absolutely no idea he was looking at $4,000 worth of custom Brunello Cucinelli stealth wealth garments. He only respected fashion if the brand name was plastered across the chest in massive gold letters. Courtney knows how to present herself. My father continued swirling his champagne. She understands the value of an image. That is why she is successful, and you are living in a basement. Take some notes from her. Try to look presentable tomorrow. Andre is bringing important clients to see the house, and we cannot have you scaring them off looking like a homeless person. I will do my best to stay out of your way, I replied, maintaining my meek facade. I turned around and walked back down the stairs to my basement sanctuary, leaving them to toast to their imaginary victory. Once I was safely behind closed doors, I dropped the frightened act entirely. I sat at my desk and pulled up my secure server. Andre was moving faster than I anticipated. He already had buyers lined up for an illegal sublease, and my father was actively helping him commit wire fraud. The sheer entitlement was staggering, but I needed to let them dig their graves just a little bit deeper before I pushed them in. My phone vibrated violently against the desk. I glanced at the screen, expecting an email from my transition team, but it was an urgent fraud alert from my bank. A $12,000 charge had just been processed on my secondary platinum card. My blood ran cold. I quickly opened my banking app, tracking the transaction details. The merchant was a premium catering and event planning company based in Destin. I checked my designer tote bag sitting on the armchair near the stairs. The zipper was undone. My mother Brenda had snuck down here while I was outside getting berated by my father and dug through my personal belongings. She had stolen my credit card. I pulled up the itemized receipt the catering company had automatically emailed to my account. Brenda had booked a full-staff premium open bar and gourmet appetizers for a massive luxury open house event scheduled for the very next afternoon. She was throwing a lavish party to market my property to Andre's wealthy buyers, and she was using my stolen money to fund the entire charade. My thumb hovered over the fraud dispute button on my banking app. It would take one tap to cancel the card, freeze the account, and shut down the catering order. But I stopped. Canceling the card would tip them off. It would stop the open house, and I wanted that open house to happen. I wanted every single one of Andre's shady investors inside my home. I wanted my mother to serve them expensive champagne bought with stolen funds. I wanted the fraud to be so massive, so public, and so undeniable that none of them could ever escape the consequences. Instead of calling the fraud department, I dialed a private, unlisted number. It rang exactly twice before a crisp professional voice answered. Marcus speaking. Marcus, it is Kelsey, I said, staring at the massive ocean waves crashing outside my window. I have a situation at the Destin property. My family has initiated a hostile takeover attempt using forged legal documents and stolen credit cards. They are hosting an illegal commercial real estate event tomorrow afternoon. Understood, Ms. Williams. Marcus replied, his tone instantly shifting into corporate warfare mode. How do you want to proceed? I need you to contact the Wealth Management Division immediately, I instructed. Assemble the senior litigation team and draft formal corporate espionage and wire fraud complaints. Do not alert the local authorities just yet. I am going to let them host their little party tomorrow. I want the trap fully sprung before we snap it shut. Get all the legal documents ready and stand by for my signal. We are going to war right now. I pocketed my phone just as the heavy, rich scent of roasted truffles and seared Wagyu beef wafted down the basement stairs. My mother had wasted absolutely no time. I climbed the steps and walked into the main dining area. The space had been completely transformed into a five-star restaurant setup. 2 private chefs in crisp white aprons were working silently in my custom kitchen, while a waiter poured vintage wine into crystal glasses that my mother had clearly purchased on her little shopping spree. My family was seated around the massive oak dining table, tearing into the $12,000 feast I was unknowingly funding. Courtney was busy snapping dozens of photos of a caviar appetizer, adjusting her posture to make sure her diamond earrings caught the light. Andre was loudly chewing a piece of steak while bragging to my father about how much commission he would make off my house. None of them even looked up when I entered the room. They simply expected me to stand in the corner like the hired help. I crossed my arms and leaned against the doorframe, watching them gorge themselves on my stolen credit line. The sheer gluttony of it all was almost impressive. Take this away, Courtney commanded without even looking at me. She shoved her porcelain plate toward the edge of the table. The hollandaise sauce is touching the asparagus, and it is completely ruining my aesthetic. Bring me a fresh plate and tell the chef to put the sauce on the side. I did not move a single inch. Clear it yourself, Courtney. I said, my voice perfectly calm and steady. The entire table went dead silent. The clinking of silverware stopped. Brenda gasped, clutching her pearls as if I had just committed a violent crime. Courtney slowly lowered her phone, her mouth dropping open in exaggerated shock. "Excuse me," Courtney snapped, glaring at me from across the table. "What did you just say to me?" I said. "Clear it yourself," I repeated, stepping fully into the dining room. "I am not your servant, and I am certainly not cleaning up after a meal you are eating in my house." Thomas slammed his heavy fist down on the oak table so hard the crystal wine glasses rattled violently. He stood up, his face turning a dangerous shade of crimson. "You listen to me, you ungrateful little brat," he roared, pointing a thick finger directly at my face. "You live under my roof right now, and you will follow our rules. If you do not start showing your sister and your mother some basic respect, I will physically throw you and your cheap clothes out onto the street tonight. Do you understand me? You owe us, Kelsey. You owe this family everything. I paid for your braces when you were 12 years old. I put a roof over your head." I let out a sharp, humorless laugh that echoed off the high ceilings. "You paid for my braces?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "Is that the debt you are holding over my head, Dad? What about the $40,000 trust fund Grandma left specifically for my college education? The one you and Mom completely drained to pay for Courtney to have a destination wedding in Tulum?" Brenda looked away quickly, taking a sudden nervous sip of her wine. Thomas crossed his arms, refusing to back down. "You did not need that money," Thomas growled. "You were just going to waste it on community college classes. Courtney needed a wedding fitting for our family status." "A wedding where I was not even allowed to be a bridesmaid," I fired back, taking a step closer to the table. I looked directly at my sister, who was suddenly very interested in her manicure. "You took my college fund to pay for your luxury beach wedding, and then you banned me from standing at the altar because you told Mom I was too fat and I would ruin your wedding photos. You made me sit in the back row with the resort staff while you spent my inheritance on floral arrangements." Courtney slammed her hands on the table. "It was my special day, Kelsey," she shrieked, her voice pitching upward. "You were going through that awkward phase and you refused to lose weight for my bridal aesthetic. I was not going to let your miserable attitude ruin the best day of my life." Before I could tear into her fragile little ego, Andre stood up, holding his hands out in a desperate attempt to play the peacemaker. He flashed his signature salesman smile, trying to diffuse the explosive tension radiating through the room. "Whoa, everyone. Let us just take a collective breath here," Andre said, smoothing the lapels of his tight suit. "We are family. We do not need to fight like this." "Thomas, sit down." "Courtney, relax your face before you get stress wrinkles." "Kelsey, just go back downstairs and let us finish our meal in peace." I did not break eye contact with Andre. "I am not going anywhere," I said. Andre sighed, walking over to me and lowering his voice as if he were letting me in on a massive corporate secret. "Look, Kelsey, you need to stop causing problems right now. Tomorrow is the most important day of my entire career. I am hosting a high-end open house here, and my ultimate boss is flying down personally to view the property." I stared at him, keeping my expression perfectly neutral. "Your boss?" I asked, feigning mild curiosity. "Yes, my boss," Andre said, puffing his chest out with arrogant pride. "The billionaire CEO of the conglomerate that owns my brokerage. Mr. Caldwell. He is looking for a summer estate in Destin. If Caldwell likes this property and buys the sublease, he will bail my firm out of the financial hole we are in. He will hand me the regional director position on a silver platter. So do not mess this up, Kelsey. Keep your mouth shut, stay out of sight, and let me handle the adults. If you ruin this for me, I will make sure your father kicks you out onto the curb permanently." Andre smirked, patting my shoulder patronizingly before turning back to his luxury meal. He thought he had just put me in my place. He thought he had terrified me with the mention of his powerful billionaire boss. He had absolutely no idea. I turned my back to the dining room and walked slowly toward the basement stairs. As soon as I was out of their sight, a massive, genuine smile spread across my face. My eyes lit up with brilliant, dangerous excitement. Mr. Caldwell, Andre's ultimate boss, was the exact same Mr. Caldwell who served as the CEO of Apex Global. The very same man who had personally signed off on the $45 million acquisition of my artificial intelligence platform just last week. Andre was banking his entire fraudulent future on impressing a man who currently worked for me. The trap was not just set anymore. The jaws were already locked and my family was happily dancing right inside them. I left the dining room without another word, letting the sound of their clinking glasses and arrogant laughter fade as I descended the wooden stairs into the basement. The air down here was cool and silent, a stark contrast to the chaotic circus my mother and sister were running on the main floor. I locked the heavy door behind me and walked over to my custom-built workstation. The glow of my multiple monitors illuminated the dark room. I sat down in my ergonomic chair and rested my fingers on the biometric scanner of my encrypted laptop. The machine hummed to life, instantly recognizing my fingerprint and granting me access to the secure corporate servers I had spent the last 5 years building. My hands flew across the keyboard, pulling up the highly classified acquisition files from last week. I bypassed the standard security protocols and opened the final buyout contract. There it was, staring back at me in high-definition digital ink: Apex Global, the massive international conglomerate that had just acquired my artificial intelligence logistics platform for $45 million. I scrolled past the endless pages of legal jargon and financial addendums until I reached the final signature page. I traced my finger over the digital signature of the man who had personally authorized the massive wire transfer into my private accounts, Richard Caldwell, Chief Executive Officer. Andre was banking his entire fraudulent career, his sinking real estate firm, and my father's stolen retirement money on impressing Richard Caldwell. He thought he was going to walk into this house tomorrow and dazzle a billionaire with stolen champagne and a forged sublease. He had no idea that the man he was trying to impress was the very same man who had just made me one of the wealthiest women in the state. I leaned back in my chair, letting the sheer poetic justice of the situation wash over me. The screen bathed my face in a pale blue light, and for a brief moment, my mind flashed back to a stiflingly hot July afternoon 2 years ago. It was our family's annual 4th of July barbecue. I had been working on my initial code base for 72 hours straight, running purely on caffeine and determination. I made the mistake of stepping out of my cramped apartment garage to grab a plate of food. Courtney was standing by the grill holding court with our extended relatives and a group of local investors my father had invited. I remember the exact way her lips curled into a sneer when she saw me. She pointed her manicured finger at my exhausted face and laughed loudly, ensuring everyone on the patio could hear her. "Do not let Kelsey ask you for money," she had announced to my father's wealthy friends. "She is running some pathetic little scam from a garage. She just types absolute gibberish on a broken laptop all day and calls it a tech startup. It is completely humiliating for our family. She is just a glorified data entry clerk begging for handouts." My father had stood right beside her, laughing along and handing out beers, while my mother loudly apologized to the guests for my delusional ambitions. None of them had bothered to look at the predictive modeling software I was creating. None of them cared that my gibberish was about to revolutionize global supply chain logistics. They just wanted an easy target to mock. Well, the garage scam had just paid out $45 million. And the golden child sister was currently upstairs wearing stolen clothes, eating stolen food, and participating in a massive felony. I shook the memory from my head and focused back on the screen. I needed to see exactly what Andre was planning for tomorrow. I opened a secure browser and ran a rapid background sweep on Andre's boutique real estate firm. It took me less than 3 minutes to bypass his terrible network security and access his active listings. I almost gasped when the page loaded. Andre had already uploaded a premium virtual tour of my house. He had pulled the photos directly from Courtney's ridiculous Instagram live stream earlier that morning. The listing described the property as an ultra-exclusive corporate retreat, available for an immediate commercial sublease at an exorbitant monthly rate. He had completely fabricated a dummy corporation as the primary leaseholder and boldly listed my forged high school signature as the authorizing guarantor. The sheer audacity of his crime was breathtaking. He was practically wrapping his own arrest warrant in a neat little bow. I minimized the fraudulent listing and opened my secure encrypted email client. I did not need to go through secretaries or wealth managers for this. During the final stages of the buyout, Richard Caldwell and I had exchanged direct contact information to streamline the technical handover. We had developed a strong mutual respect. He appreciated my ruthless efficiency, and I appreciated his no-nonsense approach to business. I created a new message and attached the PDF of Andre's fraudulent real estate listing, along with a copy of my actual property deed and the forged power of attorney document Andre had shoved at my chest. I kept my message brief, professional, and devastatingly casual. Richard, I wrote, my wealth manager informed me that you are currently touring the Florida coast for a new summer estate. I also understand you have a viewing scheduled for tomorrow afternoon at the address attached to this email. I thought you should know that this is my personal private residence. The broker you are meeting, Andre, is my brother-in-law. He is currently attempting to illegally sublease the property using forged documents and stolen funds. I will be on site tomorrow during your tour. I look forward to seeing you. Best, Kelsey. I hit send. The encrypted message vanished into the digital ether. I sat in the quiet basement listening to the faint sounds of my family upstairs laughing and drinking their stolen wine. I watched the clock on my monitor tick forward. 1 minute passed. Then 2. A sharp chime broke the silence of the room. A new email had just hit my secure inbox. It was marked with high importance directly from Richard Caldwell's personal server. I clicked open the message. There was no corporate greeting. There were no pleasantries or legal disclaimers. The billionaire CEO had replied with a single terrifyingly precise sentence. I will handle this personally. The morning sun pierced through my basement window, signaling the beginning of the most anticipated day of my life. I had barely slept. The single line of text from Richard Caldwell was burned into my mind. I spent the early hours reviewing the security feeds from the discrete cameras I had installed throughout my house shortly after moving in. Upstairs, the caterers had already arrived. I could hear the clattering of crystal glasses and the heavy footsteps of workers hauling massive floral arrangements across my custom hardwood floors. I closed my laptop and stretched, preparing to head upstairs when the basement door flew open. Brenda marched down the wooden steps clutching a bundle of cheap, scratchy fabric. She did not bother knocking or offering a morning greeting. She just tossed the balled-up clothing directly at my face. It hit my cheek and fell onto my desk. I looked down at it. It was a generic black and white maid uniform, complete with a stiff white apron. "Put this on," Brenda commanded, her tone, leaving absolutely no room for debate. "You are going to serve drinks and clear plates today. I already told the country club ladies that you finally found work as a domestic helper, and they are expecting to see you making yourself useful for once. Do not embarrass us by acting like you are above hard labor." I stared at the hideous uniform, my fingers brushing against the stiff polyester blend. "Are you seriously asking me to play the role of a hired servant in front of Andre's clients?" I asked, keeping my voice perfectly flat. "I am not asking, Kelsey, I am telling you," Brenda snapped, crossing her arms and glaring down at me. "You are living here for free, eating our food and ruining your sister's aesthetic just by breathing the same air. The absolute least you can do is hold a tray of champagne and keep your mouth shut. Courtney is networking today to secure her lifestyle brand, and I will not have you wandering around looking like a depressed charity case. Put the uniform on and get upstairs in 10 minutes, or Thomas will physically drag you out to the curb." She turned on her heel and marched back up the stairs, slamming the door behind her. I picked up the cheap black dress and smiled. Brenda thought she was humiliating me. She thought forcing me into a servant's outfit would break my spirit. She completely forgot that I was already perfectly accustomed to this exact role. I slipped off my expensive cashmere loungewear and pulled the rigid black dress over my head. As I tied the white apron around my waist, a vivid memory flashed through my mind. I was 16 years old, standing in our childhood kitchen while Courtney hosted a massive sleepover for the cheerleading squad. My mother had handed me a nearly identical apron that night. She told me I needed to earn my keep by serving pizza and pouring sodas for Courtney's popular friends. I spent that entire night invisible, fetching extra napkins and cleaning up spilled drinks while my sister and her friends mocked my weight and my baggy clothes. Brenda had cemented my role as the lesser daughter right then and there. I was the help and Courtney was the royalty. But today was entirely different. Wearing this uniform was not a punishment. It was an absolute gift. It was the perfect camouflage. People do not look at the help. They ignore the woman holding the tray. They speak freely over the girl clearing their empty glasses. By forcing me into this ridiculous outfit, my mother had just given me a front row ticket to listen to every single word Andre said to his wealthy marks. I walked up the stairs and stepped into my own living room. The transformation was nauseating. Andre had set up massive promotional banners featuring his face and the logo of his failing real estate brokerage. Courtney was stationed by the grand entryway wearing a slinky designer cocktail dress, greeting local socialites and country club wives as if she held the deed to the property. Brenda was floating between groups, loudly bragging about Andre's business acumen while throwing subtle, pitying glances in my direction. I grabbed a silver tray of champagne flutes from the kitchen island and began circulating through the crowd. I kept my head bowed, serving drinks and collecting discarded napkins. Just as I predicted, I was completely invisible. Wealthy investors and local elites looked right through me, carrying on their conversations as if I were a piece of furniture. After about an hour of playing the obedient maid, I noticed Andre acting strangely. He was not addressing the crowd as a whole. Instead, he was systematically pulling individual men away from the main party and guiding them toward my private oceanfront balcony. I balanced my silver tray on one hand and quietly slipped out through the side patio doors, blending into the shadow of the large outdoor fireplace. Andre was standing near the glass railing, speaking in hushed, urgent tones, with a man wearing a Rolex that cost more than most cars. "This property is highly exclusive," Andre murmured, clapping the man on the shoulder. "I am offering you the premier summer lease, but you have to lock it in right now. I have 3 other buyers ready to wire the funds today. If you want this beachfront access, I need a $50,000 deposit transferred directly into my firm's escrow account by the end of the hour." The man nodded eagerly, pulling out his phone to initiate the wire transfer. "Excellent doing business with you," Andre grinned, shaking the man's hand. I watched the investor walk back inside. Less than 2 minutes later, Andre pulled a completely different man out onto the balcony. I leaned closer to the stone fireplace, keeping my tray steady. "I am giving you first priority on this summer lease," Andre whispered to the second man using the exact same urgent tone. "But I need the $50,000 deposit wired to my firm immediately before the other buyers swoop in." My eyes widened. Andre was not just illegally subleasing my house, he was subleasing the exact same non-existent summer rental to multiple different investors at the same time. He was taking multiple $50,000 deposits for a single property he did not even own. It was not just unauthorized leasing, it was massive documented wire fraud happening right in front of me. I lowered my silver tray onto a patio table and rolled up the sleeve of my cheap black uniform. I tapped the face of my high-tech smartwatch, navigating to the hidden voice memo application. I hit the red record button. The small device vibrated on my wrist, capturing crystal-clear audio of Andre actively scamming a third investor out of $50,000. I stood in the shadows, letting the recording run, my heart pounding with sheer adrenaline. He was handing me his own prison sentence on a silver platter. I just needed to keep the recording going until Mr. Caldwell walked through the front doors. I let the recording run until Andre sealed the deal with a firm handshake and a promise to email the wiring instructions. As the third investor walked away with a satisfied grin, I tapped my smartwatch, ending the capture and syncing the encrypted audio file directly to my remote servers. The evidence was secured. I picked up my silver tray and seamlessly slipped back into the chaotic flow of the open house. The party was in full swing now, an absurd spectacle of unearned luxury. My mother had spared absolutely no expense with my stolen credit card. Waiters in crisp white shirts circulated with towers of fresh seafood and delicate hors d'oeuvres. A jazz trio played softly in the corner of the grand living room, while bartenders mixed custom cocktails at a portable mahogany bar. The sheer volume of entitlement radiating from my family was intoxicating because I knew exactly how steep the drop was going to be. I navigated through the dense crowd of local socialites and wealthy real estate tycoons, collecting empty champagne flutes. As I approached the floating glass staircase, I spotted Courtney. She had her phone mounted on a stabilizer stick, spinning in slow circles while broadcasting to her followers. She was gesturing wildly toward the custom architectural elements of the house, taking absolute ownership of a space she had seen for the first time yesterday. "The energy in this home is entirely my vision," Courtney told her phone screen, running her manicured hand along the imported Italian marble of the accent wall. When Andre and I acquired the lease, I immediately knew we had to gut the interior. I personally designed this open concept layout. I chose the acoustic wood paneling to reflect a serene organic aesthetic. It is all about curating a lifestyle of absolute peace and elevated consciousness. I stood a few feet away, keeping my face hidden behind my tray. The acoustic wood paneling she was bragging about was not installed for a serene aesthetic. I had custom ordered those specific panels to soundproof the server room, located directly behind that wall, ensuring my artificial intelligence hardware could run without echoing through the house. Courtney was claiming my highly technical architectural modifications as her own imaginary interior design triumphs. I watched her twirl in her designer dress, soaking up the virtual adoration of her followers, completely oblivious to the real owner wearing a maid uniform just outside her camera frame. I moved past the staircase and headed toward the back deck where a thick cloud of expensive cigar smoke hung heavily in the coastal breeze. Thomas had gathered a circle of older, wealthy men around the outdoor fire pit. They were the elite members of his former country club, the exact men he had been trying to impress for his entire adult life. He was leaning back in my custom lounge chair, holding a cigar in one hand and a glass of scotch in the other, playing the role of the triumphant patriarch. I approached the circle quietly, carrying a tray of fresh drinks. I kept my head down, playing the invisible domestic helper exactly as my mother had ordered. "This is quite the setup," Thomas, one of the country club men, said, gesturing toward the infinity pool and the private beach beyond. "I did not realize you and Brenda were looking for a secondary estate down here in Florida. I thought you were strictly New England guys." Thomas laughed, a loud, booming sound filled with unearned arrogance. "Well, Arthur, you know how it is. You reach a certain point in your career and you realize you need a proper sanctuary. Brenda and I are considering making this our permanent retirement home. Andre found it for us, of course, but the ultimate lease is in the family name. It is the perfect place to host the grandchildren and enjoy the fruits of our labor." The men murmured in respectful agreement, clinking their glasses. Another man, a retired hedge fund manager, took a puff of his cigar and looked toward the house. "Speaking of family, I saw Courtney inside holding court. Beautiful girl. But what about your youngest, Kelsey? Right. What is she up to these days?" I froze, gripping the edges of my silver tray. I kept my gaze fixed on the wooden deck planks, waiting for my father's response. Thomas let out a dismissive scoff, waving his cigar in the air. "Oh, Kelsey, she is finding herself," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "You know how that generation is. No real drive, no sense of loyalty to the family legacy. She dabbled in some computer nonsense for a while, but it never went anywhere. Brenda and I let her stay in the basement out of charity. You have to take care of your own, even when they are a complete disappointment. Hopefully, being around Courtney's success this summer will finally rub off on her and she will get a real job." The men chuckled, shaking their heads in shared wealthy paternal sympathy. I stood there, absorbing every single word. He was sitting on my $4 million deck, drinking scotch paid for by my stolen credit card, claiming my house as his retirement home, and using my existence as a cautionary tale to amuse his friends. I did not say a word. I did not defend myself. I simply swapped out their empty glasses for full ones and walked back inside. The satisfaction of the impending destruction was far sweeter than any immediate argument. I checked my smartwatch. The timing was aligning perfectly. I moved toward the grand foyer, positioning myself near a massive floral arrangement where I had a clear line of sight to the front driveway and the main living area. Andre was pacing near the front doors, checking his designer watch every 30 seconds. He was sweating, visibly nervous, completely ignoring the party guests he had invited. Suddenly, a sharp chime echoed from the smart home security panel on the wall, indicating a vehicle had breached the main gate. The heavy wooden front doors were propped wide open to let the ocean breeze in. I looked past Andre and watched as a sleek jet-black Maybach glided smoothly up the pristine paver driveway. The vehicle was a masterclass in intimidation. It parked perfectly parallel to the front steps. The engine cut off, and an absolute heavy silence seemed to fall over the immediate area. Andre gasped. He frantically smoothed his hair, yanked on the hem of his suit jacket, and practically tripped over his own feet as he scrambled out the front door. The rear doors of the Maybach opened simultaneously. Two men stepped out first. They wore immaculate charcoal suits and carried identical leather briefcases. They moved with predatory precision, scanning the property with cold, calculating eyes. Corporate attorneys, Apex Global's finest. Then the passenger side door opened. Richard Caldwell stepped out into the Florida sun. He wore a sharp navy suit without a tie, radiating an aura of absolute, unquestionable authority. He did not look like a man arriving to view a summer rental. He looked like an executioner arriving to tear a company down to its foundation. "Mr. Caldwell," Andre shouted, his voice cracking slightly as he sprinted down the stone steps, extending his hand eagerly. "Welcome to Destin, sir. I am Andre, your lead broker for this exclusive viewing. It is an absolute honor to have you here." Caldwell did not take Andre's hand. He did not even look at Andre's face. Caldwell's piercing gaze swept right past the sweating real estate broker, right past the grand entrance, and landed directly on me, standing quietly in the foyer in my cheap black and white maid uniform. The trap was officially closed. Andre practically vibrated with desperate energy. He shoved his manicured hand out, throwing a sycophantic grin across his face as he sprinted down the stone steps. Caldwell did not even flinch. He simply let his icy gaze drop to Andre's outstretched hand for a fraction of a second before stepping smoothly past him and entering the grand foyer. The two corporate attorneys flanked him like silent sentinels, their faces entirely devoid of emotion. Andre spun around, his fake smile never wavering, and scrambled to catch up. He began his rehearsed pitch immediately, gesturing wildly to the vaulted ceilings and the expansive ocean view. "Mr. Caldwell, welcome to your future sanctuary." Andre boasted, his voice carrying loudly over the soft jazz music playing in the living room. "As I mentioned in our previous correspondence, this property is the absolute crown jewel of the coast, an ultra-exclusive private retreat. We have full authorization to execute an immediate commercial sublease today." Andre snapped his fingers at his assistant, who rushed forward with a leather-bound portfolio. Andre pulled out a crisp sheet of paper and held it up like a prized trophy. "I have the power of attorney right here, signed by the primary leaseholder, completely ironclad. We can bypass all the usual corporate red tape and get you the keys by sunset." Caldwell did not look at the paper. His expression remained utterly stony. He stood in the center of the foyer, his sharp eyes methodically scanning the room, taking in the catered food, the oblivious local investors, and the sheer audacity of the setup. He was a man accustomed to ruthless corporate warfare, but watching a local real estate broker attempt to illegally lease a $45 million tech founder's private home was clearly a new level of absurdity even for him. Sensing the arrival of unimaginable wealth, Courtney abandoned her live stream and materialized next to Andre. She adjusted the neckline of her designer cocktail dress and flashed Caldwell a dazzling, predatory smile. "Mr. Caldwell, it is an absolute thrill," she purred, stepping uncomfortably close and extending a delicate hand. "I am Courtney. I personally curated the interior aesthetic of this property. If you ever need someone to manage the styling of your other corporate estates, my lifestyle brand is currently expanding its elite client portfolio." Caldwell looked at her hand as if it were a used napkin. He did not shake it. He did not offer a polite nod. He simply turned his head and looked at one of his attorneys. "Ensure the security perimeter is locked down," Caldwell instructed his lawyer. His voice a low, commanding rumble that completely cut off Courtney's networking attempt. Courtney's smile froze on her face. She slowly lowered her hand, her cheeks flushing a deep, humiliated crimson. She was not used to being ignored, especially not by wealthy men. While Andre desperately tried to recover the momentum, I stood perfectly still by the floral arrangement, holding my heavy silver tray. Suddenly, sharp fingernails dug viciously into my upper arm. I turned to see Brenda glaring at me, her face contorted in a mask of hushed, violent panic. "What are you doing standing out here staring like an idiot?" Brenda hissed, her grip tightening on my arm as she physically tried to shove me backward. "Get back to the kitchen immediately. You are embarrassing us in front of the billionaire." The sharp, stinging pain in my arm brought a rush of bitter memories flooding back to the surface. I vividly recalled how Brenda used to grab me this exact same way during Courtney's high school sleepovers. She would drag me into the kitchen, shove trays of pizza and soda into my hands, and force me to serve Courtney's popular friends. If I ever tried to join the conversation, Brenda would quickly usher me away, cementing my role as the lesser daughter. She made sure everyone in our house knew Courtney was the star, and I was merely the domestic help. "I am just doing my job, Brenda," I replied, keeping my voice dangerously calm. I did not break eye contact. I did not back down. Your job is to stay out of sight. Brenda spat, her voice a toxic whisper. This is the most important day of Andre's career. Thomas and I have millions riding on this deal. If you mess this up with your pathetic, gloomy attitude, I will personally see to it that you never step foot in this family's homes again. Now take that tray and get back to the kitchen before I make a scene. I looked down at the heavy silver tray in my hands. It was currently loaded with 4 full crystal champagne flutes, a heavy glass bowl of expensive caviar, and several ceramic appetizer plates. I looked back up at Brenda. Her eyes were wide with desperate, controlling rage. She fully expected me to bow my head, turn around, and scurry back into the shadows just like I always did when I was a teenager. I smiled a cold, empty smile. I effortlessly twisted my arm out of her painful grip. You are right, Brenda, I said softly. I should probably go serve the VIP. Before she could grab me again, I stepped away from the floral arrangement. I did not retreat toward the kitchen. Instead, I walked directly into the center of the grand living room. I moved with absolute calculated purpose straight toward the billionaire CEO and the man trying to scam him. Andre was still babbling to Caldwell, waving the forged power of attorney in the air, completely unaware of his impending doom. We can finalize the wiring instructions right now, Sir Andre pleaded. Apex Global will have the ultimate summer retreat. I marched straight up to Andre. He finally noticed me approaching in my cheap-made uniform. His eyes widened in sheer panic, realizing the sister-in-law he had threatened was about to interrupt his billionaire pitch. He opened his mouth to snap at me, to order me away. He never got the chance. I stopped exactly 1 inch away from his polished Italian loafers. I looked him dead in the eye, flipped my wrists, and purposefully dropped the entire silver tray right at his feet. The heavy metal tray hit the hardwood floor with a massive, echoing crash. Crystal flutes shattered into hundreds of sparkling pieces. Champagne exploded across Andre's expensive shoes and splashed onto the cuffs of his tailored trousers. Ceramic plates cracked loudly, sending caviar and sauce flying across the pristine luxury rug. The entire party went dead silent. The jazz trio abruptly stopped playing. Every single head in the room turned to stare at the center of the floor. The entire party went dead silent. The jazz trio abruptly stopped playing. Every single head in the room turned to stare at the center of the floor. The sharp crack of the shattered crystal was still ringing in the air. A pool of expensive vintage champagne foamed rapidly around the toes of Andre's polished Italian leather loafers, soaking instantly into the suede. Dark beluga caviar smeared across the impeccably clean cuffs of his tailored trousers, and rich hollandaise sauce splattered across the intricate pattern of the luxury Persian rug. For a split second, the sheer shock of the moment paralyzed him. His jaw went completely slack, his eyes darting frantically from the ruined floor to the stoic, expressionless face of the billionaire he was desperately trying to impress. Then the panic morphed into explosive, uncontrollable rage. The fragile veneer of the sophisticated real estate broker completely vanished. The veins in Andre's neck bulged against his tight collar, and his face turned a deep mottled shade of purple. Are you an idiot? Andre roared, his voice echoing off the high vaulted ceilings and utterly shattering whatever refined atmosphere my mother had tried to curate. He pointed a trembling, manicured finger directly at my face, his chest heaving. Clean that up and get out of here. Get out of my sight right now before I have you physically thrown out onto the street. I did not blink. I did not flinch. I did not drop to my knees to clean up the mess. I just stood perfectly still, letting the heavy silence stretch out again. The wealthy country club guests were watching us like it was a spectator sport, whispering behind their champagne glasses, their eyes wide with scandalized delight. Before Andre could launch into another screaming tirade, heavy footsteps pounded across the hardwood floor. My father shoved his way past a group of local real estate investors, his face a terrifying mask of barely contained fury. Thomas marched directly up to me and violently grabbed my upper arm, his thick fingers digging painfully into my skin. He was trying to assert his dominance, trying to remind me of the physical hierarchy that had ruled my entire childhood. Apologize to Mr. Caldwell right now, or I swear to God! Thomas hissed through gritted teeth, his breath smelling heavily of the expensive cigars he had been smoking on my deck. You apologize for your spectacular incompetence, and then you vanish. If you ruin this deal for your sister and brother-in-law, I will make you regret the day you were born. I looked down at his heavy hand gripping my arm. The scratchy polyester of the cheap maid uniform rubbed against my skin. For 29 years, I had let this man dictate my worth. I had let him drain my college fund. I had let him mock my career and mock my very existence. He truly believed he could still bully me into submission with a tight grip and a harsh whisper. But the woman standing in this foyer was no longer the frightened teenager who needed his validation. I violently yanked my arm backward, shaking off his aggressive grip with a force that actually made him stumble back a half step. I will not apologize for dropping a tray in my own living room, I stated, my voice loud, clear, and carrying to every single corner of the grand space. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd of socialites and investors. The whispering instantly stopped. Thomas recovered his balance, his eyes widening in pure absolute disbelief at my public defiance. "Have you lost your mind?" he sputtered, his face turning as red as Andre's. "And I certainly will not apologize to the man whose firm you just tried to defraud." I continued, stepping squarely into the center of the mess, ignoring the crunch of shattered crystal under my shoes. I looked directly at Andre, who had suddenly gone from purple to a sickly, chalky white. "You have been taking $50,000 summer lease deposits all afternoon for a property you do not own, Andre. I have the audio recordings synced to a secure cloud server. You just committed federal wire fraud in front of half the county." Andre opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He looked like a fish suffocating on dry land. He glanced wildly at Mr. Caldwell, then back at me, sheer terror finally breaking through his arrogant facade. The color drained from his face as the reality of my words hit him. He had just been caught running a massive scam on a billionaire's time. From across the room, Brenda let out a high-pitched, hysterical shriek. She shoved her way to the front of the crowd, her face flushed with panic and perfectly applied makeup. She could not process what was happening, so she resorted to her default defense mechanism, attacking me to protect her golden child's husband. "She is insane!" Brenda screamed, waving her hands frantically toward the front door. "Someone call the police. Security, get in here right now and remove the maid. She is having a psychotic break. She does not own anything. She lives in our basement out of our own Christian charity. Remove her immediately before she hurts someone." Brenda lunged forward as if she were going to physically drag me out the door herself. Thomas raised his hand, ready to grab me again. Courtney was wailing in the background about how I was ruining the most important day of her life. The entire family was melting down desperately, trying to maintain their illusion of wealth and control by crushing me under their heels one last time. But none of them got the chance. Richard Caldwell, who had been standing perfectly still observing the absolute chaos, with the cold, detached calculation of an apex predator, finally moved. He did not look at Brenda, who was still shrieking for security. He did not acknowledge Thomas, who was puffing his chest out. He completely ignored Andre, who was practically vibrating with nervous sweat. Caldwell simply stepped forward. He walked right past the babbling real estate broker, his expensive leather shoes crunching deliberately over the broken champagne flutes and the smeared caviar. He did not care about the mess. He did not care about the optics. He stopped exactly 1 foot away from me. The towering billionaire CEO, the man who controlled a massive global empire, the man my family was practically willing to sell their souls to impress, looked down at the cheap domestic uniform I was wearing. A faint ghost of a genuine smile touched the corners of his mouth. He extended his hand toward me and bowed his head slightly in a gesture of profound, undeniable respect. "Ms. Williams Caldwell," said his deep voice cutting through the remaining noise in the room like a steel blade. "It is an absolute honor to finally meet you in person." I took Richard Caldwell's hand, letting his firm grip validate everything I had worked for over the past 5 years. The collective gasp that echoed through the room sounded like all the oxygen was suddenly sucked out of the vaulted space. The country club elites, the local socialites, and the wealthy real estate vultures all froze in a state of sheer cognitive dissonance. They had spent the entire afternoon stepping around me, demanding drink refills, and treating me like an invisible piece of furniture. Now they were watching the most powerful man in the room bow his head to me. Andre looked like he was having a severe medical event. He blinked rapidly, staring at Caldwell's extended hand and then at my face. His mind completely incapable of processing the scene unfolding in front of him, furiously tried to correct what he perceived as a monumental billionaire mistake. He practically leaped forward, physically trying to wedge himself between Caldwell and me. "Mr. Caldwell," Andre stammered, a nervous, hysterical chuckle escaping his tight throat. "Sir, there must be some sort of profound confusion. You do not need to shake her hand. She is nobody. She is just my wife's deadbeat sister. She is a maid. We hired her to pass out drinks because she cannot hold down a real job. You must have mistaken her for someone else." Brenda frantically nodded her head, practically vibrating with anxiety. She stepped up beside Andre, grabbing his arm to show a united front. "Yes, exactly, Mr. Caldwell. She is severely troubled. We try to keep her out of the public eye because she is an embarrassment. Please come into the drawing room where it is clean and we can sign the lease documents. Let the help clean up this mess." Caldwell slowly released my hand and turned his imposing frame toward Andre. The temperature in the room seemed to plummet 10 degrees. The two corporate attorneys flanking Caldwell subtly shifted their briefcases, their faces hardening into identical masks of predatory corporate menace. They looked at Andre the way a butcher looks at a very stupid cow. "A maid," Caldwell repeated, his voice dangerously quiet, forcing Andre to lean in just to hear his own execution. "You insufferable fool." Andre physically recoiled. The color vanished from his cheeks completely, leaving him a sickly pale gray. Caldwell did not raise his voice, but the absolute authority in his tone commanded the attention of every single person in the grand living room. "This woman is the sole architect of the artificial intelligence logistics network my conglomerate just purchased for upwards of 9 figures. She is a multi-millionaire, and as of yesterday morning, a sitting board member of our parent company. You are currently attempting to pitch me a property that her holding firm legally owns free and clear." The words hit my family like physical blows. The resulting silence was so heavy, so absolute, you could hear the ocean waves crashing against the private beach outside. Thomas let out a choked, wheezing sound. The expensive Cuban cigar he had been chewing on slipped right past his lips and bounced across the floor, leaving a trail of gray ash on the imported rug. He stared at me, his jaw hanging open, his chest inflating and deflating rapidly as his brain short-circuited. The man who had spent my entire life telling me I was a worthless disappointment, a cautionary tale to amuse his wealthy friends, was suddenly looking at a woman who could buy and sell his entire net worth before breakfast. He took a stumbling step backward, bumping into the fire pit, seating completely emasculated in front of the exact men he had been trying to impress. By the floating glass staircase, Courtney stood completely paralyzed. The phone she had been using to broadcast her fake, extravagant lifestyle slipped from her perfectly manicured fingers. It hit the marble tile face down with a sickening crack, the screen shattering into a spiderweb of broken glass. The live stream abruptly ended, but she did not even flinch. She just stared at me, her eyes wide with a horrified, dawning realization. The acoustic wood paneling and the imported Italian marble she had claimed to her followers as her own brilliant design triumphs were actually paid for by the sister she had forced into a humiliating uniform. Her entire fabricated online persona had just been incinerated. Brenda looked like she had physically shrunk. Her hands trembled violently, clutching her pearl necklace, as if it could somehow protect her from the sheer magnitude of her own arrogance. She opened her mouth to speak, to formulate some kind of defense or excuse or maternal justification, but her vocal cords completely failed her. She was trapped in the living room of the daughter she had mocked, surrounded by the high society friends she had invited to witness her false triumph. I turned my attention back to Caldwell, ignoring my family's collective paralysis. The itchy polyester fabric of the maid uniform had served its purpose perfectly. The trap had been baited, the cheese had been taken, and the rats had eagerly sprinted inside the cage. It was time to shed the disguise. I reached up to the high, stiff collar of the cheap black and white dress. With deliberate, agonizingly slow movements, I unfastened the top button. Andre watched me, his eyes darting frantically between my hands and Caldwell's stony face, sweating profusely as his entire reality crumbled around his ruined shoes. I unbuttoned the rest of the uniform in a fluid motion, shrugging it off my shoulders. I let the cheap fabric pool uselessly around my ankles, dropping it right next to the shattered champagne flutes and the smeared caviar. Beneath the humiliating costume I was wearing, exactly what a board member of a global conglomerate should wear to a business execution. A stunning, immaculate, custom-tailored midnight blue Tom Ford suit. The silk lapels caught the light from the chandeliers, radiating a quiet, undeniable power. I adjusted my cuffs, feeling the cool weight of the platinum watch Caldwell's team had gifted me upon finalizing the acquisition. I finally felt like myself. I felt dangerous. I stepped gracefully over the discarded maid dress and the broken glass, closing the distance between myself and Andre. He shrank back, putting his hands up in a pathetic defensive gesture. His meticulously constructed facade of a high-rolling real estate tycoon had completely vanished, leaving behind a terrified small-time scam artist who had just realized he had invited a great white shark into a goldfish tank. I looked past his sweating face and met Caldwell's calculating gaze. The attorneys behind him had already popped open their briefcases, retrieving thick stacks of legal filings and cease and desist orders. The local country club guests, who had been mocking me moments ago, were now backing away toward the exits, suddenly desperate to distance themselves from Andre's impending legal destruction. "Welcome to my home, Mr. Caldwell," I said, my voice projecting clearly through the silent house, carrying the full weight of my ownership. I smiled, a predatory, razor-sharp smile, directly at my trembling brother-in-law. "Shall we discuss the fraud your employee is committing?" Shall we discuss the fraud your employee is committing? The question hung in the cavernous space, vibrating with an electric tension that made the air feel thick. Andre stumbled backward, his polished loafers sliding against the champagne-soaked rug. He opened his mouth, but the only sound that escaped was a pathetic wheeze. His perfectly styled hair was now matted with sweat. I did not wait for his brain to reboot. I reached into the breast pocket of my suit and pulled out my smartphone. With a few swift taps, I bypassed the home network security grid. Behind Andre, the massive 85-inch smart TV that dominated the living room wall flared to life. Every eye in the room darted to the glowing screen. I swiped my finger across my phone, casting two high-resolution documents side by side for the entire party to witness. On the left side of the screen was the official registered property deed for the estate. It clearly listed Apex Global Holdings as the sole proprietor, a company that Caldwell and his legal team immediately recognized as my personal investment vehicle. On the right side of the screen was a scanned copy of the document Andre had been waving around all afternoon, the fake power of attorney. "You see, Andre?" I said, my voice carrying a lethal calm as I began to pace the length of the ruined Persian rug. "When you and Dad mocked me for being a data clerk, you forgot one crucial detail. Data clerks know how to trace IP addresses." Thomas visibly flinched at the mention of his own insult. He sank lower against the fire pit seating, looking rapidly between the television screen and me. I continued pacing, keeping my gaze locked on Andre. "You assumed I was just crunching numbers in a basement. You never realized I was building the digital infrastructure that secures billions of dollars in corporate assets. So when you logged on to the public library Wi-Fi last Tuesday to digitally forge my signature on that fraudulent lease agreement, my network flagged the anomaly immediately. I watched you create the fake document in real time." Andre raised his trembling hands, shaking his head in a frantic denial that convinced absolutely no one. "Kelsey, please," he choked out. "This is a misunderstanding. I was just trying to secure a highly lucrative tenant for the family portfolio." "There is no family portfolio?" I snapped, my voice cracking like a whip. "There is only my portfolio, and you decided to use my home as your personal ATM." I tapped my phone screen again. The forged documents minimized, and a grid of high-definition security footage populated the massive television. The cameras I had discreetly installed behind the acoustic wood paneling had captured everything. The screen showed clear, crisp video of Andre standing in the driveway earlier that afternoon, shaking hands with the three local investors. The audio was pristine. Everyone in the living room heard Andre explicitly demanding $25,000 cash deposits to secure priority leasing rights. "I have logs of you forging my signature, and I have footage of you taking illegal cash deposits today," I announced, letting the reality of his crimes wash over the silent room. "You took $75,000 in under-the-table bribes for a property you do not own. You drafted a fake lease to trap a billionaire CEO. You leveraged the corporate weight of your brokerage firm to legitimize a brazen criminal scam." Courtney let out a choked sob. She looked at her husband with an expression of pure horror. Her entire identity was built on his perceived wealth and status. Andre, she whispered, her voice trembling. Tell them it is a lie. Tell them you did not do this. Andre could not even look at her. He kept his eyes fixed on the television screen, watching his own criminal acts replay on a loop. Brenda suddenly found her voice. She stepped forward, pointing an accusatory finger at me. You set him up, she shrieked, her face twisted in denial. You planned this entire sick charade just to humiliate us. You deliberately let him believe he was managing this house. I turned to my mother, feeling absolutely nothing. No anger, no sorrow, just a cold, clinical detachment. I did not force Andre to forge legal documents, Brenda, I replied smoothly. I did not force him to extort cash from local businessmen. I simply gave him enough rope to hang himself, and he eagerly tied the noose. You spent my entire life protecting Courtney from the consequences of her actions. Let us see if you can protect her husband from federal prison. Richard Caldwell had remained silent throughout my presentation. He stood with his hands clasped behind his back, his sharp eyes analyzing the documents and the video footage with the ruthless efficiency of a machine. He did not look angry. He looked profoundly disappointed in Andre and deeply impressed by me. Caldwell turned his head slightly, acknowledging the two Apex corporate attorneys standing rigidly behind him. Draft the termination papers immediately, Caldwell ordered, his voice echoing with absolute finality. I want his corporate access revoked before I walk out that door, freeze his broker accounts, and seize his company-issued hardware. The lead attorney nodded sharply, instantly pulling a slim tablet from his briefcase and typing with rapid precision. Andre let out a sound that was half gasp and half sob. Mr. Caldwell, please, he begged, taking a desperate step toward the billionaire. I can fix this. I can return the deposits. I have generated millions in revenue for your firm. You cannot just fire me. Caldwell did not even grant Andre the dignity of looking at him. He kept his gaze fixed on the security footage still playing on the screen. Your employment status is the least of your concerns. Andre Caldwell stated, his tone devoid of any human empathy. Your brokerage license is being revoked effectively immediately, and we are handing this entire cache of digital evidence directly to the FTC and the federal prosecutor's office. You attempted to use my conglomerate to facilitate real estate fraud. You are a liability, and I eradicate liabilities. The absolute certainty in Caldwell's voice shattered the last remaining pillar of Andre's ego. His knees visibly buckled. The slick, arrogant real estate broker completely collapsed. Andre dropped to his knees, landing directly in the puddle of spilled champagne and ruined caviar. He grabbed the fabric of his own trousers, gasping for air, as a full-blown panic attack seized his chest. Please, Andre wept, looking up at Caldwell from the floor. Please do not send me to prison. I have a family. I have a reputation. Courtney covered her face with her hands, sobbing uncontrollably as she watched her husband grovel in the dirt. Thomas stared blankly at the wall, his entire worldview dismantled in the span of 5 minutes. The golden son-in-law, the man who was supposed to elevate the family legacy, was crying on the floor, waiting for the police to arrive. Caldwell adjusted his tailored cuffs and stepped smoothly around Andre's kneeling form, completely ignoring the man's pathetic pleading. He walked toward me, the two corporate attorneys falling into step right behind him. Caldwell extended his hand once more, not as a prospective buyer, but as a business equal. Miss Williams, Caldwell said, his tone crisp and professional. Your network security is as flawless as your structural design. Apex Global looks forward to our continued partnership. My team will finalize the remaining acquisition details by Monday. Thank you, Richard, I replied, taking his hand with a firm shake. I apologize for the theatrical nature of this meeting, but vermin require a specific type of extermination. Caldwell actually chuckled, a low, dry sound. Efficiency is always appreciated. Good day. He turned and strode out the open front doors, slipping into the back of the waiting Maybach. His two attorneys remained for exactly 30 seconds. One bent down and yanked a sleek company-issued smartphone directly out of Andre's shaking hand. The other calmly stepped over the pool of champagne, retrieved a leather laptop bag from the entryway table, and followed his colleague out the door. The remaining country club guests were already fleeing toward their luxury vehicles, scrambling to escape the blast radius of my family's total destruction. The jazz trio was packing up their instruments in record time. Within minutes, the grand foyer was empty except for the five of us. The silence was suffocating. Andre was still curled on the floor, weeping quietly into his hands. Courtney stood frozen over her shattered phone mascara running down her cheeks in thick dark streams. Then Brenda snapped out of her paralysis. The vicious, snarling woman who had dug her nails into my arm just 10 minutes ago vanished. In her place, a sickeningly sweet, desperate martyr appeared. She frantically smoothed her hair, pasted on a wobbly smile, and took a step toward me. She reached out her hands, trembling, trying to grab the lapels of my custom Tom Ford suit. "Kelsey, sweetie," Brenda cried out, her voice pitched in a high manic register. "We did not know. We had no idea you were doing so well for yourself. But we are family. You have so much money now, you can just let this go. Pay off Andre's debts to save your sister's marriage." I stepped back neatly, avoiding her grasping hands. The sheer, unadulterated audacity of her request was breathtaking. She had just threatened to banish me to the kitchen. She had called me a pathetic embarrassment in front of a billionaire. Now, less than 60 seconds after learning my net worth, she was demanding I write a blank check to a man who had just committed federal fraud. "Save her marriage?" I asked, my voice echoing off the high ceilings. "You mean reward him for illegally subleasing my property while treating me like dirt? He made a mistake, Kelsey." Brenda pleaded, tears welling in her eyes, perfectly timed for maximum manipulation. "We all make mistakes. You have to help us. You are the only one who can. You cannot let your own sister face bankruptcy. That is what families do. We save each other." I let out a harsh, humorless laugh that made Brenda flinch. "Like you saved my credit when you opened credit cards in my name to buy Courtney's wedding dress," I fired back. Brenda's fake tears instantly stopped. Her mouth clamped shut. Courtney let out a small gasp and looked away, unable to meet my eyes. I stepped closer to my mother, forcing her to look at me. "You stole my social security number when I was 22 years old, Brenda. You maxed out 4 different lines of credit to buy Courtney a Vera Wang gown and fund a lavish honeymoon in the Maldives. You left me with tens of thousands of dollars in debt right out of college. When I confronted you about the collection agencies calling me, you told me I was being selfish. You told me it was my duty to ensure Courtney had the perfect day because she was the beautiful one who married well." I paced around the shattered glass, gesturing to the opulent room around us. "You ruined my financial life for years. I had to learn network security just to untangle the mess of identity theft you created. I lived on ramen noodles in a damp basement apartment, coding for 18 hours a day to dig myself out of the hole my own mother dug for me. You never apologized. You never paid back a single cent. And now you expect me to drain my accounts to bail out a criminal just to keep Courtney in designer shoes." Thomas could not handle the shift in power. He could not stand watching his wife be reprimanded by the daughter he deemed worthless. He puffed out his chest, trying to summon the old authoritarian rage that used to make me cower in my bedroom. "That is enough," Thomas bellowed. His face flushed red. He marched forward, pointing a thick finger at my chest. "I do not care how much money you have. I am still your father. You owe us respect. We are going through a terrible crisis right now. We lost our house." His voice cracked on the last word. The loss of their massive Connecticut estate had been the defining tragedy of their year. They had blamed the economy, the bank's bad investments, everything except their own rampant overspending. They had spent the last 6 months crashing in Courtney's guest room, bleeding Andre dry, and desperately trying to maintain their country club memberships while dodging creditors. "You owe us your support," Thomas demanded, stepping into my personal space, trying to use his height to intimidate me. "We are blood. You will fix this right now. You will call Caldwell and tell him Andre was acting on your orders. You will wire the funds to clear this up. We have suffered enough losing our home." I did not back away. I looked at the red-faced, desperate man who had spent my entire life making me feel small. I let a slow, icy smile spread across my face. I slid my hand smoothly into the interior pocket of my blazer. My fingers brushed against the crisp, folded document I had been waiting to deliver all day. The ultimate checkmate. "About that, Dad," I said softly, keeping my eyes locked dead on his. "You didn't lose your house to the bank. I pulled a single crisp sheet of paper from the interior pocket of my blazer and unfolded it with agonizing slowness. I held it up so the heavy bold letterhead caught the light of the crystal chandeliers overhead. Thomas squinted his eyes, darting frantically across the text as his brain struggled to comprehend the legal jargon printed on the page. Your $1.5 million defaulted mortgage was packaged and sold off as toxic debt. 6 months ago, I said, my voice cutting through the dead silence of the room. The bank did not want the liability of a bloated underwater asset tied to a man who had not made a single mortgage payment in nearly a year. You spend all your time bragging at the country club about your massive real estate portfolio while secretly drowning in overdue notices and final warnings. So the bank auctioned your debt off to a private investment group for pennies on the dollar just to get your toxic ledger off their books. I took a deliberate step closer, watching the arrogant sneer completely melt off his face. I bought it. Apex Global Holdings is the private investor who foreclosed on your property. You do not owe the bank, Dad. You owe me. The blood drained completely from Thomas's face, leaving him a sickly grayish white. He staggered backward, his legs giving out as he hit the edge of the glass coffee table. He let out a strangled wheezing sound, and his hand flew up to clutch his chest, his thick fingers digging into the fabric of his expensive golf shirt. For 27 years, he had controlled every aspect of my life through financial intimidation and emotional manipulation. He had used his money as a weapon to dictate my college choices, to belittle my career ambitions, and to elevate Courtney as the undisputed golden child simply because she married a man who appeared wealthy. He had spent my entire childhood calling me a terrible investment. He loved to loudly declare over holiday dinners that I would end up bankrupt and begging for his charity. Now the universe had delivered a brutally poetic counterstrike. The daughter he verbally abused and financially exiled was holding his entire financial existence in the palm of her hand. Every brick of his massive Connecticut mansion, every blade of grass on his manicured lawn, every remaining ounce of his dignity legally belonged to me. You cannot do this. Thomas gasped his breath, coming in short, panicked bursts, as he leaned heavily against the table to keep from collapsing. It is illegal. You are my daughter. You cannot foreclose on your own flesh and blood. You have to give it back. Business is business, Thomas, I replied, throwing his favorite phrase right back at him with lethal precision. You taught me that lesson when you refused to co-sign my student loans because you said I was not a safe bet. You taught me that when you watched Brenda steal my identity and told me to stop whining because family requires sacrifice. Well, I am acting exactly like the ruthless businessman you always claimed to be. I saw an undervalued asset held by a delinquent debtor, and I executed a hostile takeover. Andre was still weeping on the floor, the reality of his own destroyed life, mingling with the collapse of his father-in-law's empire. The smell of the spilled vintage champagne and crushed caviar was beginning to sour in the warm air of the room. Courtney had dropped to her knees beside him, not to comfort her husband, but to frantically gather the pieces of her broken phone, as if she could somehow tape her fake life back together before her followers noticed. Brenda was shaking her head wildly, her carefully sprayed hair falling into her face, losing all its structural integrity. "Kelsey, this is evil!" she cried out, her voice shrill and desperate, echoing against the acoustic wood paneling. "We raised you. We put a roof over your head. You cannot leave us homeless on the street. Where are we supposed to go?" "You can go anywhere you want," I said casually, slipping the foreclosure document back into my blazer pocket. "But you cannot stay here. This house belongs to my firm, and my private security team will be arriving in exactly 10 minutes to conduct a full sweep of the premises. Anyone who is not on the approved guest list will be physically removed for trespassing." "You are a monster!" Courtney shrieked, suddenly looking up from her broken screen, her face twisted in an ugly mask of rage. "You are just jealous of me. You have always been jealous of me because I am beautiful and I married well, and you are just a bitter, lonely workaholic data clerk." I looked down at my sister, feeling a profound sense of pity replacing my anger. "Courtney, your husband is currently facing federal wire fraud charges because he tried to scam my company to pay off his mounting debts. You do not even own the designer clothes on your back right now. The only thing I am feeling is absolute relief that I do not share your delusion." Outside the massive floor-to-ceiling windows, the distant wail of sirens began to cut through the rhythmic sound of the crashing ocean waves. The noise started as a faint, high-pitched whine and rapidly grew louder, echoing down the private coastal road. Andre let out a fresh wail of despair, pressing his face into the wet rug. He knew exactly who was coming for him. Caldwell had promised to hand the digital evidence over to the authorities, and billionaires do not make empty threats. The sirens grew deafening, tearing through the peaceful beachfront atmosphere. Suddenly, brilliant flashes of blue and red light pierced the darkness outside, illuminating the grand living room in a chaotic strobing effect. The flashing lights bounced off the crystal chandeliers and the broken glass on the floor, painting my family's terrified faces in alternating shades of crimson and harsh blue. Several squad cars were pulling into the long circular driveway, their tires crunching aggressively against the gravel. I turned away from the impending arrest of my brother-in-law and focused my attention back on my mother. Brenda was trembling so violently, her teeth were visibly chattering. She looked terrified, her eyes darting frantically between the flashing police lights outside and my calm, unyielding expression. I stepped directly into her line of sight, forcing her to look at me, as heavy, commanding footsteps began pounding up the front porch steps. "Oh, and Mom," I added, my voice dropping to a soft, conversational whisper that somehow cut straight through the deafening noise of the sirens. "That $15,000 catering bill you put on my stolen credit card to pay for this little real estate mixer?" Brenda froze, her eyes widening in pure, unadulterated terror as the heavy front door burst open. "That is felony identity theft in the state of Florida," I said, giving her a sweet, final smile. "That is felony identity theft in the state of Florida," I said, giving her a sweet, final smile. The heavy oak front door swung wide open, hitting the wall with a thunderous, jarring thud that echoed through the vaulted ceilings of the foyer. Two uniformed police officers strode into the grand entryway, their heavy boots crunching over the shattered crystal on the floor. The sharp, static crackle of their radios cut through the suffocating silence of the living room. Outside the massive floor-to-ceiling windows, the flashing red and blue lights of their cruisers painted the room in harsh, strobing colors, casting chaotic shadows over my family's terrified faces. Caldwell's lead corporate attorney did not waste a single second. He stepped forward with practiced, ruthless efficiency, intercepting the officers before they could even ask a single question. He handed a thick manila folder containing the forged power of attorney, the real estate deeds, and the digital network logs to the taller officer. In his other hand, he held out a silver flash drive containing the pristine security footage of Andre soliciting illegal cash bribes. The attorney spoke in a low, rapid murmur, pointing directly at Andre, who was still curled in a pathetic, trembling ball on the champagne-soaked Persian rug. He then turned his finger toward my mother, who had gone completely rigid, her eyes wide with unadulterated panic. The officers nodded, their expressions hardening as they split up to secure their targets. They moved with a swift, heavy authority that completely shattered the sophisticated country club illusion my family had tried so desperately to maintain. The first officer marched straight toward Andre. He reached down, grabbing the expensive fabric of Andre's tailored suit jacket, and hauled him roughly to his feet. Andre let out a high-pitched, pathetic squeak that sounded like a deflating tire. He offered absolutely no physical resistance. His legs were practically made of jelly, wobbling uselessly beneath him as the officer expertly twisted his arms behind his back. The sharp metallic click of the steel handcuffs ratcheting closed echoed loudly off the acoustic wood paneling. It was the definitive, undeniable sound of his entire fake empire collapsing into dust. Andre openly wept. Thick tears and snot smeared across his pale face as he blubbered incoherent apologies to Caldwell, to the empty room, to anyone who would listen. He was no longer a hotshot real estate broker. He was just a terrified scam artist facing federal prison. Seeing her husband in literal chains finally broke Courtney's brain. The pristine, meticulously curated influencer facade she had spent years building on social media vanished in a single instant. She threw herself onto the floor, landing directly in the puddle of spilled vintage champagne and smeared beluga caviar. The dark fish eggs stained the pristine white silk of her expensive dress, but she did not even notice. She began kicking her legs and pounding her fists against the imported hardwood, screaming at the top of her lungs. It was a full-blown violent toddler tantrum coming from a grown woman. Her perfectly styled hair fell into a wet, tangled mess across her face as she thrashed around the broken glass of her shattered smartphone. "My life is ruined!" Courtney shrieked, her voice hoarse and raw, echoing terribly in the large room. "My followers are going to see this. You ruined my aesthetic, Kelsey. You ruined my brand." She was not crying for her husband, who was currently being read his Miranda rights. She was not crying for the potential loss of his freedom. She was entirely consumed by the death of her social media engagement. While Courtney threw her spectacular fit on the floor, the second officer stepped squarely in front of Brenda. "Ma'am, put your hands behind your back," he ordered, pulling his own set of cuffs from his duty belt. Brenda gasped, physically recoiling as if the officer had struck her across the face. She looked wildly around the room, desperately searching for someone to rescue her from the consequences of her own actions. She looked at Thomas, who was staring blankly at his own shoes. She looked at Caldwell, who was already walking out the door without a backward glance. Finally, she looked directly at me. "You cannot do this to me!" Brenda shrieked, fighting the officer as he firmly grabbed her wrists and forced them behind her back. "I am your mother. I gave birth to you. You are a monster, Kelsey. You have no heart." She thrashed wildly, attempting to pull away. The sudden violent movement caused her heavy pearl necklace to catch on the officer's uniform. The string snapped, and dozens of expensive white pearls scattered across the marble floor, bouncing and rolling away like little hailstones. I stood perfectly still, watching her struggle against the cold, hard steel. I searched myself for a single ounce of guilt, a single shred of daughterly sympathy, and found absolutely nothing. "I learned from the best," I replied, my voice completely flat and devoid of any human emotion. "Enjoy the county jail, Mom." The officer yanked her arms up slightly, forcing her to comply with the arrest. Brenda wailed a terrible guttural sound of pure social humiliation as she was marched toward the open front door. Andre was dragged out right behind her, his expensive Italian loafers dragging uselessly across the floor. The flashing police lights illuminated their walk of shame down the long driveway, parading them past the lingering country club guests and local real estate investors who had gathered outside on the lawn to watch the spectacle. The high society elite were already pulling out their phones, eagerly recording the downfall of the fraudulent power couple. Brenda tried to hide her face behind her cuffed hands, but it was entirely too late. Her social execution was being broadcast live to the exact people she had spent her entire life trying to impress. With Brenda and Andre physically removed from the premises, the grand living room suddenly felt incredibly vast and empty. The only sounds left were Courtney's pathetic hiccuping sobs from the floor and the distant fading wail of the departing police cruisers. I slowly turned my attention to Thomas, the great patriarch of the family, the man who had ruled our household with an iron fist of financial abuse and endless withering criticism. He was standing by the floating glass staircase entirely alone. He looked completely stripped of his pride. The aggressive, blustering bully who had marched up to me 15 minutes ago demanding respect and asserting his dominance was gone. His broad shoulders slumped forward, and his heavy hands trembled violently at his sides. He looked incredibly old, fragile, and utterly pathetic. He was standing in a massive beachfront mansion he did not own, realizing with crushing certainty that his defaulted underwater mortgage was fully controlled by the daughter he had treated like worthless garbage for 27 years. He had no wife left to shield his ego. He had no golden son-in-law left to brag about to his golfing buddies. He had absolutely zero leverage left in his miserable life. He opened his mouth, his lips moving silently, but no words came out. He had finally run out of insults. I took a deep breath, savoring the crisp, clean ocean air flowing through the open doors of my own home. I looked down at the whimpering mess of my sister on the ruined rug, and then at the trembling hollow shell of my father. I raised my hand and pointed a single manicured finger directly at the heavy oak front door. "You have exactly 5 minutes to get your fake designer bags out of my house before I press trespassing charges." The second officer did not hesitate. He smoothly secured Brenda's wrists behind her back, the cold metallic click of the steel cuffs echoing sharply across the grand foyer. The brutal reality of the situation finally pierced her thick armor of delusion. She twisted violently in the officer's grip, her face contorting into a mask of absolute terrified fury. You are a monster! Kelsey Brenda screamed, her voice cracking hysterically as the officer firmly guided her toward the open front door. You have no heart. I did not blink. I crossed my arms and watched her struggle against the inevitable. I learned from the best. I replied, my tone completely level and devoid of any sympathy. Enjoy the county jail, Mom. Meanwhile, the first officer hauled Andre up from the puddle of spilled champagne. Andre's legs gave out twice, forcing the officer to practically drag him across the room. He was sobbing uncontrollably, his expensive tailored suit ruined, and his professional reputation permanently obliterated. The flashing red and blue lights illuminated his tear-streaked face as he was shoved roughly into the back of a squad car right next to my screaming mother. I turned my attention back to the living room. Thomas stood completely paralyzed by the floating glass staircase. The arrogant patriarch who had spent decades tearing down my self-esteem was now just a trembling, broken old man with absolutely nothing to his name. Courtney was still hyperventilating on the floor, clutching a counterfeit designer bag to her chest like a life preserver. I pointed a steady finger toward the massive oak front doors. You have exactly 5 minutes to get your fake designer bags out of my house before I press trespassing charges. The threat of joining Brenda and Andre in the back of a police cruiser finally mobilized them. Thomas stumbled toward the guest wing, his breathing ragged and shallow. Courtney scrambled to her feet, slipping once in the smeared caviar before sprinting after him. They frantically stuffed their belongings into oversized luggage, abandoning anything they could not immediately carry. I stood by the staircase watching them pack, with a cold, clinical satisfaction. They had treated my home like a personal playground, and treated me like a disposable servant. Now they were fleeing like common thieves in the night. Exactly 5 minutes later, they dragged their heavy suitcases through the front door. They stumbled down the wide marble steps, fully expecting to load their belongings into the luxury rental SUVs they had leased to impress their high society friends. Instead, they stopped dead in their tracks. The circular paved driveway was completely empty. Thomas spun around looking wildly for the vehicles. I stepped out onto the front portico, leaning casually against a stone pillar. Looking for your cars, I called out. I had them flagged for unauthorized parking an hour ago. The local tow company works incredibly fast around here. Courtney let out a shrill scream of utter frustration. How are we supposed to leave? She wailed, dropping her heavy suitcase onto the gravel. The front security gate is a mile away. I offered her a serene, predatory smile. I suggest you start walking. The exercise will do you good. I turned around and walked back inside, locking the heavy oak door behind me with a deeply satisfying click. I bypassed the ruined living room and walked upstairs to the master suite. I stepped out onto the expansive private balcony overlooking the sprawling estate. I poured myself a glass of vintage champagne from the private reserve, the exact champagne they had proudly purchased using my stolen credit card limits. I took a slow, deliberate sip, savoring the dry, crisp taste of absolute victory. Below me, the high society country club guests and local investors had already fled in their luxury vehicles, desperately speeding away from the scandal to gossip about the incredible downfall of the once arrogant family. The only people left on the massive property were Thomas and Courtney. I watched from high above as they struggled to drag their heavy-wheeled suitcases down the long, winding paved driveway. Courtney was hobbling in her stilettos, crying loudly, complaining about the blisters forming on her feet. Thomas leaned heavily against his luggage, gasping for breath, his posture completely defeated. It was the ultimate walk of shame, broadcast under the bright glow of the estate's security lights. A spectacular view, a deep voice noted from the doorway. I turned to see Richard Caldwell stepping onto the balcony, holding his own glass of champagne. He had stayed behind to witness the final act of the play. He walked over to the glass railing, looking down at the two tiny figures struggling toward the distant front gate. He raised his glass toward me, his eyes gleaming with genuine professional respect. Brilliantly executed, Ms. Williams. Caldwell said, his voice a low rumble of approval. A ruthless, but entirely necessary corporate restructuring. I clinked my crystal glass against his. I prefer to call it a thorough house cleaning, Mr. Caldwell. My smartphone buzzed in my blazer pocket. I pulled it out, glancing at the glowing screen. It was a group message from my chosen family, the brilliant, relentless team of tech co-founders who had helped me build the AI logistics network from scratch in a damp basement apartment. The message read, "System integration fully successful. Congratulations on the launch, Kelsey. Dinner is on us tonight." I smiled down at the text, feeling a profound warmth spreading through my chest. These were the people who had supported me during my darkest days. They had believed in my vision when my own parents had called me a pathetic failure. They were my true family. I slipped the phone back into my pocket and turned to face the endless expanse of the dark ocean. The rhythmic sound of the crashing waves finally drowned out the last faint complaints from the driveway below. Blood only makes you related. Respect makes you family. And tonight I didn't just clean my house, I finally took out the trash.